My bike has started doing this great new trick, and I thought I'd share. This bike is losing engine coolant, and I have no idea why or how. And seeing as we're all here, where, when, what, and even who for good measure. Just to put it out there, losing coolant is a bad thing. The engine could overheat and blow its top. Up until now, I've tried absolutely nothing and it still hasn't worked. So I've decided not just to do something, but to do everything. Full disclosure, it hasn't been a lot, meaning the problem isn't so bad I can't ride the bike. So I've been putting up with it, adding coolant as needed. But the weather is warming up and it's high time I sort it out. It's only going to get worse, if not worser. I realize we're getting a little bit out of the machining comfort zone, so fair warning, this video contains grease monkey content. Not to worry though, I'll be right here the whole time right by your side. If it gets to be too much, I'll throw in some machining. Though I may have just jinxed myself. Now I just know I'll break a bolt off in the head. God damn. I think it's the head gasket. Not positive, it might be the head gasket. Though let's take this a step at a time, cowboy. Also, if you haven't noticed, this is a Sherco 2.9. Though it doesn't really matter. I may get some grief for this, but modern trials bikes are all more or less the same. There aren't that many companies that even make these, and their relationship at times can be a bit incestuous. At the risk of insulting your intelligences let's quick recap what we're looking at so we're all on the same page. This is a two-stroke thermonuclear engine. Just idling, there's something like 25 or 30 explosions per second inside that little cylinder. It gets pretty toasty. To keep from burning that toast, it has a liquid cooling system. Most two-stroke engines, some two-stroke engines, I guess I don't know if it's most, but like your lawnmower or chainsaw or weed eater, are air-cooled. A small fan, usually built onto the engine's flywheel, pushes air across the engine, keeping it cool. Well, not hot. Not that hot. Okay, fine, it keeps it from liquefying. Maybe you can just see it down in there as I pull the cord. Those are fan blades. Maybe impeller blades. And this is water-cooled, just like your car. There's a water circuit in there, and it's water taking the heat away from the engine instead of air. And as far as engines go, in trials bikes like this one, the use case is rather harsh. Bikes like these usually creep around quite slowly and see bursts of high revs and clutch dumps all day long. Perhaps you can make the case that dirt bikes have it worse, at something insane like 10,000 RPMs from the minute they're started until they run out of gas. Maybe, but at least they're moving the whole time. Now, what was I even talking about? These engines get hot, and they have a cooling system to help deal with that. The entire engine, or most of it anyway, is shrouded in a water jacket. There's a second cavity in there full of water, or coolant, and that coolant takes heat away from the engine. It's like putting an ice pack on your swollen head. Hot coolant from the engine is then pushed to the radiator. That hot coolant makes the radiator hot. A fan blows on the radiator to cool it down, like you'd blow on that hot soup you're eating after having busted your head. Blowing on hot things is scientifically proven to cool them down. Crazy, huh? That now cooler coolant is then routed back to the engine to pick up more heat. Or, as in my case, it's fired right out the top of the radiator cap. I really should have washed this bike before doing this video. My apologies. As I mentioned, the coolant is moved between the engine and the radiator by a little pump, and it lives right in here. Cutest little water pump that ever could. We'll break into that in a moment and have a look. The water pump runs the whole time the engine is running. It's geared right into the engine. The fan, on the other hand, doesn't start doing its thing until the coolant gets hot. When the coolant cools down, the fan stops. I'll show you the thermostat that turns the fan on and off when we get there. Consequently, you shouldn't turn your bike off while the fan is running. Give it time to do its thing. It should only take like a minute. So the problem could be any one or a combination of the cooling system components we just talked about. Anything from not enough coolant to a bad radiator, or radiator cap, or pump. Maybe you have a hole in one of your hoses, or the thermostat isn't working right, not telling the fan to go when it should, or the fan itself for that matter. Given my symptoms, the fan seems to be coming on and off. I know there's coolant in there. The fact that it's shooting out the radiator cap, I don't know. My money is either on a bad radiator cap, which I'll change, they're cheap, And yes, I checked my radiator cap with a multimeter. Seems okay, but I'm still not positive. Or it could be a blown head gasket. I'm not seeing coolant in the engine oil. The engine oil's coming out not milky, not frothy. But the fact that I'm seeing so much pressure in the radiator seems to point to the cylinder head. Of course, it could be just as simple as loose cylinder head bolts. Maybe I just torque those bolts down and problem solved. Or it could be as bad as a cracked head itself, which would stink. Oh, now ain't that rich? Ignore all the carbon deposits for now. I think I see the culprit. I'm no expert, but I spy with my one good eye a weak spot in the inner seal, right about that area there. There are two seals here. This engine uses O-rings, not a gasket, but same thing. The outer gasket keeps stuff from getting out or into the engine. The inner gasket separates the combustion chamber from the coolant passages. There are also some small O-rings around each bolt to keep coolant from squirting out from around the head bolts. It looks to me like pressure from the engine was pushing past that inner seal and pressurizing my coolant system, and then blowing out the radiator cap. By the looks of the buildup, it may have been sucking some coolant in too, but I wasn't getting a lot of smoke, or any smoke, out the tailpipe. Anyway, before I can replace the seals, I'll need to clean this mess up. Ideally, I'd break the engine down, give the cylinder a light honing, change the piston rings. But other than the coolant problem, this engine was running perfect. Ton of power, great compression, and quite honestly, I just want to be able to ride it. We could get into trying to read the tea leaves here. It does look like it's spent a little time running hot, which makes sense, I suppose. But for now, I just want to do my best to clean it, and if I'm feeling it, order some parts and save the rest for a rainy day. Here's what I plan to do. You don't need to do all this yourself if you're having similar problem. Reason through it, fix just the part that needs fixing. But in my case, I'm going to change almost everything. Head gaskets, water pump seals, the water pump itself, pump bearing, shaft and pinion gear, radiator cap, maybe even the thermostat. My bike is over 10 years old now, and while I'm in there, I might as well. Compared to being stranded all alone in the middle of nowhere, parts for these bikes are cheap. At least these parts that I plan to change anyway. There's maybe a better look at the impeller, the water pump. It's mounted to a shaft that comes through the cover. There's a bearing and there should be two seals in there. It's attached to this, unfortunately, plastic pinion that interfaces with the gearing on the motor in the bike. Again, this is always turning when the bike is running. And it looks like, coolant is ported through here. So there's a gasket, of course, oil on this side, coolant on this side. That impeller would throw coolant, there's a hole in the side. So coolant is coming from the radiator into the face of the impeller. Impeller spins, pumps it out the back, and into the rest of the engine. Can't see any real way to get a hold of this. I'm going to squeeze this in some soft inserts in the vise. This side has what looks to be a 10mm hex built right into the hub of the impeller. Let me try to break that down and we'll see what these seals look like. Came off surprisingly easy. Plastic impeller, molded in brass insert. And that seal has seen better days. There's a weep hole on the bottom of this casting. I did see a little bit of water coming out of there, not a ton. That tipped me off to a bad seal in the water pump. It almost looks like maybe someone put some sealant on there. See if I can get this out. Not sure what that is. There's the bearing. That shaft has seen better days. I'm guessing that's what tore up the seal. Let's see if that seal won't come out. I want to be careful not to scratch the counterboard that this seal is sitting in. It sure is in there. This thing may have been glued in place. I guess somebody was worried about losing it. Sorry about that. I had to stop the camera. The whole thing got not very family friendly. I managed to dig all that junk out of there, clean the inside up pretty good. The bearing is also shot, maybe what led to all these problems. It's very wobbly. Anyway, I got some new parts. They're the new seals, the bearing you saw. I also got what they call a high flow pump, high flow impeller. See, maybe it's taller. I'm not sure if this is marketing gimmick. I see this pop up a lot, so I thought I'd give it a try. Now, because this is taller, it's obviously not going to fit on the cover like it did before. It comes with a bit of a spacer. And it's blue, so it must be better. I mean, no offense to the people that make and sell these things. I've just never tried one, so I don't know how legit of a modification this is. Hopefully my fan comes on less often or comes on for less time when it is on. Although it is true that for the same RPMs, a taller impeller will move more water. more fluid, it doesn't depend on just the impeller. The rest of the system might not be able to handle it, meaning we might have just the same flow rate as before. Or maybe the system can handle it, you have a higher flow rate, but now the fluid is spending less time in the radiator. I don't know. What I'm getting at is this is a system, but we'll see. I'll let you know. And again, it's blue. Also comes in red. I figured red would probably run hotter. The only thing of note is that cup seals are directional. So there are two, unless I lost the other one, and they'd be installed back to back. Cup seals work sort of like parachutes or umbrellas. Pressure on this sort of empty side causes them to open up and seal. If you put them in the wrong way, then water or oil, whatever pressure you have on the outside, can squeeze its way by. That went together surprisingly well. New seals, new bearing. I feel much better about that. I cleaned up this gasket surface, gasket scraper and a very light stoning. I don't want to put this on just yet. I don't want to install it just yet because I think as I put the cover on, I'll want to be able to turn the impeller so I can get this to mesh with the bike. Just using a bit of light O-ring lube, silicone grease, just to help these stay in place. Maybe 2 drops. Cover that up, let's head over to the bike. Since I won't be able to get in here with the angle grinder, I'm just going to use some WD-40 and Scotch-Brite. These things are cooked. Probably be smart to cover the coolant passages. I want to clean around those things pretty good too. I have the side of the bike open, the water pump is off, and the coolant port is exposed, so I should be able to flush this out. Any of this junk that gets down there, I think I can wash it out. Once this is back together, if it even starts, I'll ride it for half an hour or so. Check the spark plug again. I'm starting to wonder if my carb set a little too rich. I did notice the gap on the spark plug was quite a bit bigger than it should have been. I think that can result in incomplete burns and leaving carbon behind. But with coolant getting in here, I don't know. I'll put it back together, ride it again, and check the spark plug. Resist the urge to use any abrasives on this thing. Don't try to stone the sealing surface flat. I mean, you can, or you could. You want to do that when the entire engine is broken down, where you can wash it meticulously. You don't want any abrasives getting inside this combustion chamber. Any tough spots, you can try to hit with a fingernail if you've got them. It's probably as good as I'm willing to get it. Now, I realized the other day that when I ordered all of the gaskets, I neglected to get new head bolts. I don't know if technically this size engine warrants changing head bolts when you take out the old ones, but it sounds like one of those best practices kind of thing. I'm just using 2 of the old ones until the FedEx guy shows up. In the meantime, I think I can get the side cover back on. It's a very squirrely gasket. I'm going to use some jet lube, anti-seize, on all the fasteners, anything that gets torqued, including the head bolts. That's probably too much. Here's my trusty Husky torque wrench. These cover bolts just outside the bottom end range of this thing, but it's the best I got. I call that my shooting star pattern for torquing. When you store this style of torque wrench, when you put it away, be sure to completely unload the spring. According to my YouTube analytics, over 0.75% of my viewers look up to me. And to those misguided men and women, I have something to fess up to. I had to borrow a torque wrench to finish putting the head bolts and pump cover on. Although the dubious bottom end of my faithful Husky was probably fine for the engine case, these smaller fasteners in the head and here on the pump Well, they're just too small. Torque wrench is too big. Trying to run my wrench that far below scale, the numbers would have been meaningless and I would have run a high risk of snapping these fasteners off in the block. Not to make a stink about this, but if you don't have a torque wrench, it's not the end of the world. Close, but not the end of the world. Probably tens of thousands of bikes are rebuilt in garages every day without them and work just fine. Use your common sense when tightening. Or, in a pinch, a box end wrench, a spring scale, and a calculator. If you don't have common sense or a spring scale, buy a torque wrench. If you don't have a calculator, you should reevaluate your priorities. Here's a little something I didn't see coming. With just the factory pump, the radiator hose had very little clearance to the exhaust. In fact, on close inspection, that tube had some heat damage. Not a lot, but some. Not enough to warrant a new hose at any rate. But with the spacer, to accommodate the high flow pump, that radiator tube has been pulled out, closer to the exhaust. So I've had to stuff in a little bit of that heat-resistant woven fabric, fiberglass stuff. Keep that in mind if maybe you're considering adding this to your bike. As I work my way through, I've also been changing these stupid hose clamps. I've hated these things from day one. Hate, I tell you. I don't know how many street signs the previous owner had to vandalize to get his hands on these, but why would you put something so ugly on such a pretty bike? Especially with all these pokey bits all sticking out. Not that I'm doing much better with my clamps, but these are all I have. I'm going to regret installing these. The only way to get these crimp-on clamps off is to cut them. The factory uses these nice, I never remember what they're called, like Bob Odenkirk clamps. But hopefully these hoses and clamps don't leak and they're on there a long, long time before I've got to order the right ones. I also think I need to tighten those more. You know what I've always really liked about these Shercos? It's just how easy and convenient it is to get to the radiator. I use a funnel and just pour the coolant in until my socks feel wet, then back off a couple of ounces. Bending over backwards with a flashlight and an inspection mirror gives you a clear line of sight to check the level. And that's the new cap. Easy as that. That yellow thing you see is just a wrap of old apron leather, just to keep the wires and the cables off of a potentially hot radiator. That down there, by the way, is the thermostat. I should probably fix this insulation while I'm here. I thought I was going to change it, but I'm going to leave it. I figure innocent until proven guilty. That, and I have this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that if I try to pull that out, I'm going to break something else that I don't have. This is just a switch in the coolant path. When the coolant gets to a certain temperature, it closes and that sends 12 volts to the fan, turning the fan on. Okay, all back together. I think that's about it. I believe I put all the parts back inside. Guess I'll find out tomorrow. I know this content was maybe a little different. If you like this motorhead kind of stuff, let me know. Maybe we'll do some more. But for now, I'm really curious to see if this thing starts.